Hi folks, and welcome to today's Bllumination on Sacred Earth Essentials with your hostess, Stephanie, where we believe the earth is sacred and you are too. And so on today's insight, today's Bllumination, I wanted to continue the conversation of the soil and mental health. As May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and Sadhguru is still on his journey with the Isha Foundation and Conscious Planet for spreading the word about saving soil, and how essential it is that we, as a collective species, as humanity globally, come together over something common. And one thing that we all have in common is living on this earth. And as far as I know, we all also have in common that we need to eat. And we all also have in common mental health. So how do we combine these subject areas that in the past maybe we didn't think so much about being connected? The soil is an excellent way to do this. And so the soil, with its deep, rich biodiversity and life on the microscopic level, is that microverse of what happens in the soil is then what comes up through us and becomes this macroverse that we see around us. It's the building blocks of life. And even when we look so deep down into the building blocks of life that we're examining DNA and the structure in our genetic makeup and heredity and how these genes are manifested in our bodies and in our lives and in our communities, we can even go so far as to look at soil when we look at genetics and look at how the soil and what it has or what it doesn't have contributed to the genetic development of people, species, both animals and plants, throughout all of existence on this planet, at least as we know it, not to mention life on other planets potentially, which I'm not an expert in. And so when we're looking at some of the crises that we have going on in the world today, there's this obvious, I think, huge crises of war that's happening, both internal war in our minds and our hearts and our bodies with disease, as well as this external war that we're seeing not just in the Ukraine, not just in the Middle East, not just in Africa, but even in countries as close as Mexico. And for those of you who do pay attention to the news, there is a lot more going on in the world than is presented on just mainstream media, which over 75% of mainstream media, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, per usual, is owned by one man named Robert Murdoch. So thankfully now Twitter is owned by Elon Musk. Thanks, Elon. So we'll have hopefully some freedom of speech, at least in that avenue for now. And so there's this age-old method that I've spoke about before called pani circo. If you give the people bread and entertainment, they won't pay attention to what else is going on around them. And so now we're paying attention to both our bread and our entertainment. And if you only ever knew that Wonder Bread existed, someone interesting told me this a very long time ago, how would you ever know that homemade, handmade, whole grain, artisan bread existed? And so what I ask all of you out there in whatever realm you live or work, that we are giving nurturing bread, that we're giving nutritious bread to ourselves, to those we love, and to people, both physically in the sense of actual nutrition, as well as in the sense of our mental, emotional, and spiritual health. And that when we create these microverses of health within our soil, within our souls, within our families and our communities and beyond, that does reverberate, that does provide a bridge of sorts. It is the butterfly effect, it is the pebble in the pond. And so we have to start with ourselves, creating these ripples. And with soil, not only is soil an excellent example for mental health healing when we look at the idea of composting and we look at the idea of growth mindset, and growing through what you go through and finding the richness through your experiences and making sure that your soil is alive so that those plants can then have the calcium and the magnesium and the phosphorus and the nitrogen and all this good stuff that they get from the soil, not just from the sunlight. And so that they get to weave their, not just magic, but science together, the science of life, to enrich these plants that then feed the animals and we eat, depending on your diet, the plants and animals, which is a whole nother conversation that we can get into later. And so in the soil, not only are there microbes that contribute to the alleviation of depression, but the act of gardening, the act of getting your hands in the soil, not just dirt that is devoid of life, we then soak that in through our skin and even sometimes through our mouths accidentally. And these microbials, which if you look at microdosing with psilocybin and its relation to soil health and the connection between mycelium and all of life, which again, another conversation for another day, we can see that there's multiple ways that gardening and getting out there and getting your hands in the soil and regenerating the soil, not just at a small scale, because although yes, every small drop counts, my goal, and one of the reasons that I'm here sharing my voice with you today, is so that the large corporations, large families, large organizations who have power and experience and expertise at their fingertips see the necessity of what's happening and feel the desire out of their hearts and their own free will to contribute to the Save Soil movement, because by saving soil, you're saving life on this planet. And not just physical life, but also you're creating peace. You're cultivating wild peace on this planet, within and without, when we work together with the natural world around us. I'm enjoying the birds that are out here with me. Today, out in Northern Vermont, we have a plethora of Northern Vermont wildlife. And so when we save soil, we're saving life on this planet, as I was saying. And when we enrich the food with the nutrients that the food needs, not only are we giving physical sustenance to people, but we're also helping their mental health. Many of the problems that we're seeing throughout the world, especially in the United States, where it's the land of plenty, people are still suffering from depression, anxiety, ADHD, PTSD, all the disorders, you name it, at rates that are alarming and that are contributing to global mental health as well. And when you look at the reasons why people suffer and why people fight and why there's violence in the world, and is because their basic needs aren't being met. Either they do not have their basic needs being met, the bottom of the bottom of the pyramid of the hierarchy of needs, and so they're fighting out of that fear, out of that scarcity consciousness, out of survival. And so how do we uplift, how do we upgrade humanity to a higher level of consciousness? How do we help to share and move the resources around and amplify the resources that are already available to us, in a peaceful way, where we're not having internal war, mental health, or external war, what we're seeing in a lot of countries throughout the world. Like I was saying, including in Michoacan, Mexico right now. A lot of people don't know this. Thankfully, I have a friend who's been sharing the news with me about what's happening in Mexico, and it looks like un fracaso. It's a disaster, and there's a lot of violence, and this violence affects us even from afar, even when we don't know it. So the military is now going into Michoacan to deal with the violence and the uprising, and it's coming from people's needs not being met. So if we're looking at it even just through a lens of selfish altruism, thank you for that, we are still benefiting not just other people, but the balance of the order of things, when we're making sure everybody has their basic needs met, and that they have their human rights being honored first and foremost. And there are plenty of places in the world where this hasn't been happening yet. And I see the Save Soil movement, the regenerative farming movement, the Big Green Millions Garden movement as all being a part of what's going to help to transform, cultivate peace on this planet, and solve world hunger. Speaking of which, I have an idea for solving world hunger, and also creating peace at the same time. And this may be something that's already in the works, that other people are already working on, but I thought that tweet, I'm still new to Twitter, only a year into Twitter, that was made about if Elon could, give $6 billion, I think the number was, it would solve world hunger. And he said, well, somebody give me a plan. Well, nobody, as far as I know, gave him a plan yet. And the closest plan that I've seen is the work that the organization Millions Garden Movement and the herbal and farming communities and Sadhguru with the Save Soil movement are doing, to regenerate soil and regenerate life, which also comes from infinite wisdom and the Nature Summit in Maine, this theme of regenerating life. So what I thought was like, okay, well, first of all, how many cities are there in the world? And I Googled it, thank you Google, about 10,000. So if we had an agricultural center in every main city of the world that worked on growing crops, creating agricultural goods, educating the people, creating jobs for the community, specific to that terroir and that climate, and specific to the needs of that, again, that region. And you call it the Billions Garden Movement, or whatever you want to call it. And all of those different agricultural centers throughout the world can be connected in a network and exchange not just food, but also, ideas and community. And so we have this ability with modern technology and consciousness and the thousands of years worth of seed genetics, nature's genius, that we can help to proliferate and regenerate life on this planet. And then when everyone they have their purpose, they have their basic needs, they have their food and their shelter, and most importantly, that sense of arguably belonging and family, then we will be able to lessen violence and cultivate world peace, which is what cultivates joy and healthy living, which is what everybody really wants deep down, is to love and be loved. And so how do we do that? We start small with ourselves, with what resources we have. My little iPhone, old iPhone here, mounted on a pole for a fence, so that I can take this video and just sharing what I have, knowing that that love is enough to create a ripple effect throughout the world. And so when we are in fear, when we're in scarcity consciousness, we are in fight or flight mode. We're less likely to collaborate. Our creativity is diminished. Our energy is drained faster. We're not able to work together like a beehive, or like when ants are working together, or people when they're building things that they feel very passionate about. And so I also read this beautifully artfully written article, which is shared on my Twitter page, about the families that dominate, that own the food of the world, the seed banks and all of the companies that mass produce food. And there's about 7 families that are in charge of the world's food supply, and have been for several generations. And all due respect to all of you, thank you for your work that you have done in cultivating food globally and distributing it globally. And my request, my humble and kind request to all of you, whoever you are, is that you see this need for saving the soil, and that you feel it in your heart and your bones and your blood, and that you're excited about this too. And you're like, yeah, this is like a beautiful life art global project that we want to be a part of, and that we're going to do our part to not use genetically modified seeds that are hurting the environment, to not use pesticides and other types of chemicals that are hurting the environment, to create systems that are equitable, that honor human rights globally in fair and balanced ways. And that by doing this, you're helping yourself. You're also helping yourself, because we're all connected. So when someone else is hurting, when someone else's needs aren't being met and they're suffering, we suffer too. And in my belief system, and from what I've witnessed in the world and my personal experience and education, I know that to be true for most people, that when other people suffer, we suffer too. And maybe we can't make the world perfect, and maybe we can't obliterate suffering or all kinds of strife, but we can make an improvement. There is room for improvement. I know myself individually, microcosm, and in the world, it's kind of undeniable that there's room for improvement right now. And so that's my plea, that's my prayer, that's my cry to all of you who do have power and control and money, and that there is money, my own natural energy yield, and that we can collectively put our energy together when we realize the way that things are, without blame, without shaming anybody, and each doing our own part in accordance with what we feel guided to do in our own free will. And that educating people about how to cultivate peace, about how to cultivate food, about how to inoculate logs or their soil, or just how to grow basic food themselves and how to work together in harmony is part of the answer. But what do I know for cultivating peace and saving soil and our mental health, saving soil and souls on this planet? So that's my idea. So you create that network, and then you take the money, you give a big chunk of that money to the top of the organization, or even to all of the organization, and then that money and those resources and people are sent out to all of the 10,000 major cities in the world. The agricultural hubs and networks are improved, and then the seed saving, the seed sharing, the organic and regenerative practices as much as possible, just sustainable in general, are utilized, and then the distribution can be balanced, and then we can all live more free, more happy lives, because we know that things are functioning on the planet in harmony, the way that it is designed, a wild harmony. And so that's my plan for solving world hunger. I is expressing to all of you that it is possible, that we can live in abundance consciousness, that we can cultivate seeds and plants and communities and work environments that are conducive to the health of ourselves and the planet, without taking away from people who are afraid of their resources being taken away from them, because health is the truest wealth, and you can't have health without love, and it's hard to have love without an open heart, and it's hard to have love when other people are suffering. So that is my episode today of the Sacred Earth Essentials Bllumination. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you found something useful in it. And someone taught me this little mudra a long time ago, and I'm going to share it with you now. And it's about planting a seed. It's a slight meditative breath and stretch for your body. So you can go ahead and stretch your body out like a star. Take a nice deep breath in through your nose. Feel it filling your belly. Another deep breath in. We hold so much tension in our bodies. There's so much tension in the world right now. Through this part of your body, up through your chest, through your neck, out. Hands together like you're planting a seed, okay? And here's your seed. You put your intention in your seed of what you would like to plant. I'm planting worldwide peace, where everyone has their basic needs met, and that we live in harmony. and that we are spreading nutritious bread, both physically and energetically, in the way of mental health practices for the Mental Health Awareness Month of May. Mwah. Love for all. You slightly bend your knees, breathe in, put your seed into the ground, and then as you rise up, you stretch out your hamstrings. The seed sprouts. A little sprouts, if you've ever seen a seed sprout. And then as it rises up, you breathe in. You can spread your feet to shoulder width apart. It turns upward to the sun. It has a root and now a sprout. It turns to when you see those two little leaves before the top of the seed comes off all the way, right? Breathe in. Bllumination of love consciousness, and as it grows up and it reaches towards the sun, it blossoms, it opens, and that seed that you planted, your intentions or your food, rains down on the earth in your world and emanates out to others. So go and plant your seeds of love. Save your soils and your souls. Love you all. Go in peace and be a blessing. The earth is sacred, and you are too.